This month, why the world's slowest boat is the start of some very big dreams. And why a new boat is proving so hard for the professionals. Plus, how one designer influenced a generation.
He was successful as a sailor and in many areas of design.
But first, how a globe-trotting, high-octane sailing event is raising the stakes even further in front of the crowds. Take a fleet of identical, high-powered multi-hulls, crewed by the world's best sailors, and place them on an impossibly tight course, close to shore, just meters from the crowds, and watch what happens. No wonder the event was called the Extreme Sailing Series. Sailing as it has never been seen before was the original slogan, and no one has argued. The birth of the Extreme Sailing Series 9 years ago marked a big change in the sport as high-speed, short-burst racing went on tour in front of an audience. And among the action, there were crashes aplenty.
Behind a Lingy, Red Bull go for a big bear away. There's a huge crash on board. Red Bull slam into the side of a Lingy. Oh my goodness, there's a boat come down. Oh my goodness. Men are in the water. Two boats locked together.
The racing also inspired a step change in two of the world's biggest sailing events, the America's Cup and the Olympics. 3 years later, the America's Cup organisers announced that the prestigious trophy would be to be fought aboard cats in front of a crowd. Then in 2012, spectators arrived in their thousands to watch the Olympic medal races in Weymouth. So now, in its 10th year, it's time for the Extreme Sailing Series to raise the game once more. The move to hydrofoils might have seemed obvious until you consider the short courses and the tight venues. Fleet racing on foils has never been done like this. Welcome to the new look Extreme Sailing Series. And the first stop for the 2016 World Tour, Oman. The best of the action came at the end of the regatta as the strongest breeze of the event challenged the 8 teams. The battle for a place on the podium was fierce. SAP may have been the pre-event favourites, but in the final race, the Danish team missed a mark rounding, crash-jibed, and crashed out of the rankings to finish in 5th. Instead, it was Morgan Larsen's Oman Air that took the event and the overall victory by storm, winning more than 50% of the races, unprecedented in the history of the event. Red Bull sailing team took 2nd and Land Rover BAR Academy was 3rd. But while the results were an interesting early season indicator, the big question was about the new machines. Will foiling work for stadium sailing? And what's it like to sail these high-speed machines at close quarters? The GC32 catamaran is one of the most established classes of the new generation of foiling cats. Strict rules ensure that they're all identical, just like the America's Cup World Series boats. But unlike the Cup boats, at 32 feet long rather than 45, they're shorter and have a conventional mainsail rather than a solid wing. There are no hydraulic controls either. Everything is manually powered using ropes, and the main flight control is surprisingly simple.
This is the main foil on the GC32, so this is responsible for essentially lifting the boat out of the water. When you pull this rope, basically you can see this is moving the foil back, and that's going to give the boat more lift. And once the boat is out of the water, we'll then look to take some of the rake off so as to increase the boat speed whilst on the foils. The less boat in the water, the better for us. That means that we can reach a higher speed.
With speeds nudging 40 knots, there's plenty new for the crews to learn.
It's a new element of sailing. There's new things to understand. The apparent wind is more aggressive further forward because the boats are faster. So there's new trimming elements. It's just a whole new concept.
But with the extra speed comes extra risk. For starters, it's easy for the foil to trip the boat up.
It's quite easy to suck air down on the main foil or just have the foil come out the water in sea state. And if that happens, then it loses grip.
Then there's the question of higher closing speeds.
The danger is the differential in speed, but if everybody goes fast, that's fine.
But there are also some benefits, especially when the teams are rounding the top mark of the course for the dreaded bear away.
Bearing away an extreme 40 in 20 knots of wind was a heart in the mouth, fingers crossed moment a lot of the time, whereas now you've got a foil, you just move the rake of the foil and the bow will stay up and you'll just fly away.
And no one is arguing about that.
It's a little bit more scary than, sailing. It makes the good old extreme 40s look like a walk in the park. It's quite an amazing feeling. It's the fourth dimension for sailing, I think.
Or put more simply,
Board down, boat up.
Hong Kong is the latest Volvo Ocean Race stopover to be announced for the next race that starts in 2017. Round the world sailor Francis Joyon is to have another go, setting a new record for a non-stop circumnavigation. He and his crew will set off in the autumn aboard IDEX Sport. Their target is to beat 45 days. Ian Bruce, whose conversation with designer Bruce Kirby back in the 1960s led to the creation of the laser dinghy, has died aged 82. Taylor Canfield triumphed in the Congressional Cup for the third time running. The event marks stage 2 of the World Match Racing Tour. Country qualification for the Olympics is now complete. 61 nations and 380 sailors will compete at the Rio Games. It may be the oldest Olympic class and a brute of a boat, but the Finn can still draw a crowd. The Finn World Masters in Torbole, Italy has pulled more than 400 entries from 32 countries. It's square, it's small, and it's the slowest boat in the world, according to the International Handicapping System. Not features that you'd think would ensure the long-term success for a dinghy designed to inspire young sailors to take up sailing. Yet the Optimist is one of the most popular sailing dinghies in the world. This Easter, 900 boats and children from around 30 countries proved just that as they turned up at Lake Garda in Italy to race. Yet while the event was big, it was nothing out of the ordinary for a regatta that is now in its 34th year. Back in 2012, the organising yacht club Fregalia Velariva set a new Guinness World Record for the largest single-class event when 1,055 young sailors took part. This year the fleet was split into 2 categories, 233 entries in the 9 to 11-year-old cadets and 667 15-year-olds in the juniors group. For some, just competing would be all that mattered. For others, the battle was everything. And for spectators, it was like looking into the future. How many Olympic or America's Cup dreams would start here? 3-time Olympic medalist and America's Cup skipper Ian Percy cut his teeth in the Optimist.
I remember when I first started sailing the Optimist, it was just getting away from my parents and being able to do whatever I like. That sense of freedom you have. I mean, as a 6-year-old being pushed off from the boat and suddenly looking around and there was no one to tell you what to do or what not to do was a great feeling. And then that control, you're in control of something all by yourself. You see that joy on kids when they first learn to sail all the time, that they are suddenly starting to click and they're making it go in the right direction. I mean, that's something that sailing has uniquely. You are out in the middle of nature, no one's helping you. You're 6, 7 years old and you've got to work it out for yourself. And I think as a kid, that's an amazing sense of achievement.
Hannah Mills and Saskia Clark, the British Olympic team in the 470, have Olympic silver medals from London 2012 and are heading to Rio this summer. They too started in Optimists. Hannah had been sailing for 5 years and was 14 when she won the UK Nationals in 2002. She was the first girl ever to achieve this. But that was just the start.
The Optimist Worlds is quite a prestigious thing if you're an Optimist sailor. I'd come pretty close, my first Optimist Worlds, at beating the British record, which was Paul Campbell-Jones at that point, who'd come 8th. I came 5th and first girl, and that was probably the most amazing feeling at the time.
Saskia raced Optimists too, but had taken more persuading.
I wasn't a fan of sailing at all. I've got an elder sister who's 2 years older, and she loved it, and I just tagged along, threw stones in the water. Then finally just sort of had a beautiful summer's day at a junior week somewhere, and I had run out of excuses and got on with it and absolutely loved it.
Both are now focused on the Olympics, where they will compete as a team once again.
Because the fleets are so massive, you're constantly in a battle. You know, now obviously the Olympic fleet we're racing, there's only 20 boats, but you still have those moments where you're super congested going around a leeward mark, or you're back a bit and you're trying to fight your way through the fleet. And so I think it really teaches you that skill and that ability.
Without a doubt, the sailing Oppies is sort of where my love of sailing came from, and without having sailed Oppies, there's not a chance that I'd have travelled the world like I've done doing the Olympics.
Back in Garda, the seeds of those dreams had been sown by the next generation. No wonder it's called the Optimist. Coming up after the break, why a new boat is proving so hard for the professionals, and one man's impressive legacy. But first, he's one of France's most decorated sailors and holds numerous major records. But none of that was to help on this day in Cowes. Welcome back. When this video was shot, French skipper Franck Camas was the fastest man around the world. But in this extreme sailing series race, he was the fastest to get to shore, as the commentator explains.
Group M and the Rothschild round, they've just crashed into the back of Group Armour. Both runners on the back, and if those runners are broken, they will not be able to steer this boat, and they are heading towards a concrete wall. Well, nervous look behind. Wasn't our fault, they're saying. Well, that's the least of the worries on board Group Armour. What are the crew going to do? They're heading towards the wall at speed. They're going to jump off the boat. Well, the crew are jumping in the water. Group Armour, no steerage. Look at this. Crash!
And one photographer missed it completely. One way to reshuffle the pack in Olympic sailing is to introduce a new type of boat, especially one that is new to the sailing world as well. Getting to grips with a modern, brand new machine will always take time, even for the best in the business. So when the tall, twitchy and overpowered Nacra 17 was announced as the new Olympic catamaran, it was of little surprise to see top sailors go swimming on a regular basis.
The learning curve early on in the Nacra 17 was enormous, and people were cartwheeling all over the place. It just seemed like the boat was completely uncontrollable.
Experienced sailing journalist and former 49er sailor Andy Rice explains.
It reminds me of the early days pioneering in the 49er. People used to say that 49er was unsaleable in more than a Force 3, and eventually we learnt the techniques that enables you to sail a 49er in virtually any conditions. It's been a similar, really steep learning curve in the early years of the Nacra.
Few can put that into context better than Santiago Langa, double Olympic medalist in the Tornado catamaran and 4-time world champion.
I think it's a nice little boat. It's very mixed between a catamaran and a 49er. You know, the Tornado was more like an old man. This is a little kid that you have to pay a lot of attention to. We are learning to fly it a little bit better, and yeah, it's a lot more radical boat, and you have to be a lot more active. Also, you know, when we get to these races of 3 laps and 30 minutes, when you are the 25 top boats, it's really, really tricky, and the maneuvers counts a lot. And actually, that's one of our weakest points, you know. My age is not helping against the young ladies and the young boys, and yeah, we have to work hard to improve that.
Evidence, it would seem, to explain some of the erratic results across the fleet on the score sheet. Except for one pair who couldn't stop winning right from the start.
The dominant team in the Nacra 17 catamaran it's a French team, Billy Besson and Marie Riou. The class has only been in existence for 4 years. They've had 4 World Championships and that French team has won all 4 of those.
Their dominance at World Championship events has been all the more impressive, given that it is more than just the boat that is new.
It's also a learning curve in the sense that this is the first time we've got a compulsory male-female lineup on board one boat. I'm really pleased to see that. I think that's fantastic because you don't see that in many of the Olympic sports across the board.
This mixed gender crew has thrown another variable into the equation.
A bit like the 49er, the Nacra 17 is quite an unfair distribution of workload in terms of the fact that the helm is steering the boat but isn't doing most of the hard physical work. The really hard aerobic activity is for the crew at the front of the boat, and so with that in mind you'd think that the usually stronger male might be doing the hardest work at the front of the boat. There's no sort of consensus yet as to which way round is best. At the moment most of the helms are male and most of the crews are female, and I think that is down to the fact that the most experienced catamaran sailors tend to be male. But I think that over time, as the class matures, we will probably see more females stepping to the back of the boat and we'll have more men at the front of the boat.
How much more can be learned before Rio?
I don't think anyone would say that they have fully mastered it yet. As we talk now, there's another 6 months to the Olympic Games, and that's quite a big chunk of this whole Olympic cycle. So I think even in the early part of 2016, people are still going to be learning things.
Perhaps there's one team, however, that will be less inclined to share the knowledge.
The favourite for the gold medal in the Nacra 17 has to be Billy Besson and Marie Riou. But the only time you really know when everyone is putting their cards on the table and really showing what they're made of is a World Championship. And by that measure, you'd have to say that the French are the hot favourites for the gold medal.
Hot favourites for a gold medal, but a target for the rest of the fleet. On the 24th of March 2016, the sailing world lost one of its most successful and charismatic yacht designers, Ed Dubois. Throughout his career, his work stretched from modest production boats to some of the world's largest custom super yachts. He was, by his own admission, infatuated with boats from 5 or 6 years old, yet he'd grown up inland, many miles from the sea, and to a non-sailing family. After qualifying as a yacht designer in 1974, he soon built a reputation in the yacht racing scene. But it was his pivotal role in the start of the new super yacht era in the 1990s that was to launch him into the spotlight. Bright, articulate, and perpetually enthusiastic, Dubois had another characteristic that formed a key part of his success: his charm.
Ed liked people. I mean, he was the most gregarious individual, incredibly witty, bright, very intelligent. But there's a serious and very caring side to him, and that's what I think sometimes got through to people. It wasn't just entertainment. It was, okay, now we're going to talk business, or at least we're going to talk about your dream. How are we going to make this happen? And I think that in a way set him apart.
As a boy, a trip with his mother to the Cutty Sark at Greenwich in London led to a childhood spent designing and building model yachts, which he sailed on the pond in Kensington Gardens. Then came a summer sailing camp in Neyland, Pembrokeshire, and from there, he was hooked. A Channel Islands-based restaurateur gave him his first major commission with Borsellino 3, but it was Police Car that launched him into the racing scene. In the fatal Fastnet race of 1979, Police Car romped home to help secure the Australian team victory for the Admiral's Cup.
One of the breakthrough boats for him was the Admiral's Cup team of 1981, where he had Dragon and Victory of Burnham. Victory was designed for Peter de Savary, and Peter de Savary was doing the 1983 America's Cup. So because of the success of Victory of Burnham and the Admiral's Cup, then obviously Ed was asked to design a 12-metre for the America's Cup in Newport, Rhode Island. And that really makes a huge difference. Suddenly you're thrown into the limelight. It's not just about offshore boats, but now you're designing for the America's Cup. And I think that really stepped him up into a different league.
A string of race boats followed, as did a range of popular production boats.
Of course, he had a phenomenal run with Westerly. He designed, I think, 15 boats for Westerly. Griffin, Fulmar, Sea Lord, that sort of thing. I mean, these are iconic cruising boats.
The really big break for Dubois and his team stemmed from their pioneering work in the superyacht world. Among a long list of innovations, it was the elegant and practical deck saloon layout that attracted many owners and helped to set a new style in yacht design.
I think one of the important facets of his design work was that boats had to look pretty. One of the people who was attracted by that was Neville Crichton, who went on to build Esprit and I think had 9 boats built with Ed. In terms of design, I think his great success was in super yachting, there's no doubt about that. But he still had interests in almost every discipline of yachting, and of course he sailed Firebrand. He was successful as a sailor and in many areas of design.
I think that whenever you're on a boat that you like and you let the mooring go, you let go of everything, don't you? If you have the courage to turn your mobile phone off, then you can really, really just relax. And I feel totally free. Unless you have a direct contact with how a boat sails in your heart, then you can't design a decent boat. You have to feel it, understand it, eyeball it, experience its terrifying, powerful moments and its beautiful moments. Firebrand, as far as I'm concerned, is as good a medium to refresh your memory as any. She epitomises, for me, what being on a sailing boat is all about. It's freedom, it's complete happiness away from the day-to-day worries of life. It's my potting shed.